Hey everybody, thanks for joining and welcome to our first webinar of the year. We're going to stand by. We're just going to let folks trickle in for about 1 or 2 more minutes, and then we will get started. All right, maybe another 10 or so seconds and we'll get going. All right, hey everybody, let's get this webinar started. Welcome. I'm super excited to have the audience in the room today. I've got a great lineup of panelists that are in our GMP Collective network, which we'll get to shortly. But first, a few housekeeping items. First, I want to encourage everybody to use the Q&A function. We did ask for any questions ahead of time. So we do have a couple of questions that we'll be discussing here today, but please use the Q&A throughout the session. If we don't get to your question, we will definitely follow up. So please don't be shy. With the news that's happened that came today with the FDA on CBD, in addition to everything else from 2022, there's no shortage of topics to dive into. And again, as always, with the When Things Go Wrong webinar, we're not just focused on the problems and challenges, but on the solutions for you, for your operation, for our industry. And with that, I would like to, of course, introduce you to myself. For folks who don't know who I am, I'm David Vaillencourt. I'm the CEO and founder of the GMP Collective. We started the GMP Collective back in late 2018, so we have now seen our 4th anniversary, and we're solely committed to ensuring the quality, compliance, and safety of cannabis and hemp-based products. And it has been a pleasure. I'm also the vice chair of ASTM International's Cannabis Committee D37 on cannabis. I think I mentioned that twice, and serve in a multitude of other roles, helping the industry work together towards harmonization and consistency. And with that, our topic today, before I introduce our speakers, is on transitioning from 2022 to 2023, the insights from the GMP Collective Network. You'll get to meet a few of the folks from the team here in our network at the GMP Collective. We'll go into discussing, separating the difference from hype and the headlines to risks that actually matter and deserve your concern. There's no shortage of issues of, every day, right? There's something new. So let's actually break it down and understand what were the real key takeaways from the year that are worthy of discussion and what we can do about them and learn from them. And with that, really brings into how do you best position yourself for long-term success with product quality and safety at the forefront. We'll also get into a little bit of our predictions for 2023 and which, some of them may already be coming true, I'd like to say. And of course, again, I just can't remind you and encourage you enough to put questions into the chat box for us throughout. And with that, I'd like to introduce the team here, Steve, Tess, and Steve, if you'd like to come join, and we'll have ladies go first. Dr. Tess Eidem, would you do the honors to introduce yourself? Welcome.
Awesome. Thank you, David. It's a real pleasure to be here today. My name is Tess Eidem. I am a microbiologist who investigated novel antibiotics, basically a potential new class of antibiotics. I had a fermented foods company, and I've worked in cannabis for the last 3+ years, both in manufacturing and on the quality side. And so I help cultivators overcome microbial challenges and, get them kind of ready for the future of what is in store for cannabis with potential FDA oversight. And that's my spiel.
Awesome. Tess, it's such a pleasure to have you on the webinar today. Great to see you again, as always. Let's go in, I guess, Steve Gendel, you're off mute. So Dr. Steve Gendel, jump in for me.
Yeah, thanks, David. It's good to see you again. I'm Steve Gendel, and I've been working in food safety and regulatory areas for a little more than 30 years. I spent 25 years working at the Center for Food Safety at FDA in a variety of roles as a risk assessor and a policy formulator, as the food allergen coordinator, and also involved in working on developing the rules under FSMA, particularly the preventive controls rule. So I spend my time helping manufacturers of cannabis products and edible products to make things safely and to meet requirements, standards, or government regulations.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Steve. Yeah, it's just been a couple days since we were together in San Antonio, Texas. So great to see you back at our respective area codes. And last but certainly not least, Steve Cooper, pleasure to have you on. Steve and I have worked, you and I go back the longest. We started doing some work together in 2017, 2018 in Canada. So we've had quite the journey together. Please introduce yourself.
Oh, thanks for having me, and glad to be here participating with this panel. My background is about 45 years in the industry, cosmetics, pharmaceuticals, and now into cannabis as well, mostly with quality assurance, quality control, and began consulting in 2018 in quality and building quality systems, auditing for certification bodies, and conducting training, GMP. I'm a voting member ASTM. I have quality engineer certification with ASQ. Now I'm trying to help in the cannabis industry, which needs help to implement good practices that will promote safety and quality for the patient. And that's my background.
Well said. And yeah, it's such a breadth of expertise here. I mean, we've got over 100 years between the four of us. We won't add up where the years break down, but it's impressive none the least. And one of the things that I've really enjoyed the most about my journey with the GMP Collective and into the cannabis industry is that we all, even if you consider, put yourself in the classification from, legacy operator, we all bring a unique perspective to the industry. And there are attributes that we can, and skills and knowledge that we can learn from each other that make any organization go, right? And work smoothly and effectively. So this is a great, little microcosm, just a small snippet of the breadth of expertise needed for a cannabis industry to be functional. But I think we've got a really great lineup here today to give some perspective. So with that, I want to kind of kick off with just a couple of news headlines that really kind of took away 2022 or encapsulated 2022 for me. And I won't go too deep into these articles, but for folks that have seen them, I'll send the links out late after the webinar if you'd like. There's a great article, maybe just working in, I'll go on my own preferred order, but there's a great article in Massachusetts magazine Commonwealth that I reviewed in late December titled "Marijuana Content Labels Can't Be Trusted." And it dove into, testing, lab shopping, all sorts of issues. And for folks that are here, you're like, yep, no kidding, old news. But where do you begin? Like how do you solve the problem, right? You saw California also in 2022 propose a standardized test method for cannabinoids that they were going to require every third-party testing company to use. But we all know, and that could be a whole nother webinar on why that's not the solution. And it would maybe be 7% of the solution, but without considering the other 93%, how to prepare samples appropriately, how to collect a representative sample, how to understand the variability within the cannabis plant to gather that representative sample. What an accurate label number really means. Is it 20 milligrams, 20.0? Do we get a range of 10%, 20%? What is that, right? And then of course, all the contaminants. What contaminants should we be looking for and not looking for? Does a strict panel of 9, 13, or 65? We know that innovation just does not work within that box of black and white. And of course, the chemistry of advanced extraction and synthetic derived cannabinoids making a major mark in our industry just adds to all the complications, recognizing that we need a more comprehensive approach. So, this was a really great consumer-based, consumer-forward article, which to me screams, where's the consumer confidence? And I saw a lot of other articles this year talking about, brand loyalty. I don't even think that exists in our industry based on the data. Consistency is just just doesn't exist, right? And so how do we address these problems as an industry, as an operator, as an ancillary service provider that is striving to help our clients be better, be more proactive, produce safe, consistent products? Because at the end of the day, that's what the consumer wants, right? And even take a half a step back, have we even identified what our consumers want? Are we doing that research? How are you using that to drive decision makings within your organization? Another article here from MJ Biz about cannabis growers reporting bumper harvests amid overproduction and low prices. I'm not an economist, but looking at strategic planning, doing as a business owner, doing my annual projections, my P&L, looking out even 3 and 5 years, and understanding it's not just what I think I can do, but what's the marketplace, what's the market demand, what's the addressable market, what's my competition, right? Having that look to prepare and predict how that's going to impact my prices as we work towards commoditization. Again, back to brand loyalty and consistency. How do we ensure that we're differentiating our products in the marketplace? And relatedly, again, cheap weed has become a big problem in the pod industry. I mean, how do we address this issue of price collapse and commoditization? How are you, again, back to how are you differentiating your products? How are you ensuring accurate testing and label declarations? I mean, it's a comprehensive problem, and I don't want anybody. I try to work my clients against playing the blame game of, well, it's the regulator's fault, or well, it's the lab's fault. Well, if you take that approach, you're just a sitting duck, right? Like, what are you doing to actually take control of the problem? I mean, you didn't get into business to just sit there and be at the mercy. You want to command and control. And so how are you actually doing that to benefit you? And then last but not least, if anybody did not catch this news today, the FDA second article, second cannabis related publication this week, was a statement about the FDA concluding, and I know this is not 2022, but the timing it would be remiss if we did not touch on this, that existing regulatory frameworks for foods and supplements are not appropriate for CBD and are going to work with Congress on a new way forward. You could be frustrated, you could be excited. I'm sure most folks are frustrated and have a few choice words, but I'd like to paint a slightly different picture today, and I'm going to count on Steve Gendel, our former FDA representative, to help shine some light on that with perspective, and I'll be there to back him up. I know we've got some great thoughts there. So there's a whole suite of issues, right, that have made the news. So with that, I'd like to stop talking for a moment and hand it over to my panel. I'm going to stop sharing the screen so you can see our faces. And I want to start off with Tess. So, I know you've been boots on the ground in several dozen operations. You've worked for a multi-state operator before on the other side of the country, on the East Coast. You've consulted with many of them and owner-operated companies. You've got a PhD. You've run a food business, to say the least. I mean, you've got PCQI certification, which if you don't know what that is, and you're producing or with an operation that produces an edible, you should probably know what that means, for good reasons. So what have you seen in this cannabis industry space in terms of what's realistic?
Yeah, I mean, looking back over the last 3 years and even just over the last year of headlines that you just pointed out, you know, a lot of the industry is really motivated by making money very quickly. And that kind of get rich quick scheme is not really sustainable. And I think that there's going to have to be a shift into, these more long-term goals, long-term sustainability for their companies. And most of the time these companies are really driven by metrics like gram per square foot and how much can you get out of a very small area, how many plants can you pack in, and those KPIs, those key performance indicators, are pretty much all built around yield. They're not really built around quality, around consumer safety, around even worker safety. And so how can these companies start reevaluating what their values are and their goals are, and putting it into measurable outcomes? And without a quality team, it can be pretty challenging. Most places that I have gone to don't have like dedicated quality personnel, or really any way to measure quality along the process. And so, that's something that I think if companies want to move forward, they're going to have to start shifting to protect their brand and their consumers in order to just take this next wave of the cannabis evolution.
Well said, Tess. So you brought up a word that is near and dear to my heart, and of course, Steve Cooper, whose company's name is Quality Initiatives. A keyword quality, and you talked about having a quality team, which if I put on my COO or operations management hat, especially in the cannabis industry, I'm hearing money, and I'm hearing money for staff that do not directly relate to production and outputs. Back to my yield, grams per square foot, or lumens per gram per square foot. Like, how are we actually justifying the cost of a quality unit? And with that, Steve, I mean, we've seen this. You come from 40 years in quality. You and I've worked on a couple of clients where we got them the first quality hire. And these are pretty large companies in the cannabis industry. Short of telling everyone to just invest in a whole quality unit, where does somebody in production or elsewhere on the floor begin to make an impact? What are your thoughts?
Well, so carrying forward from what Tess was talking about, where the senior management really drives things. They set the pace. And if they want to look at certain numbers, that's what they're going to be looking at. But there is another way. There is a way to let quality in and to grow within the company. So I view it as two approaches. One is top management has a role. Each employee also has a role in it. Somehow the employees need to see clearly that there's an expectation from top management. And it's just a matter of top management saying it. As simple as that. Somehow the employees need to see that clearly. That management, top management, is it regards quality and complying with standards an important thing. In addition, they don't have to say we don't care about finances, but they have to at least spend some time on that quality piece. The employees need to be well trained on the standard. We call it a GMP standard, one of the standards, and what behaviors are expected of them. They need to understand what's expected. Many companies have managers that focus on the numbers because that's what they're asked about all the time. A typical board meeting or a work meeting, a weekly or monthly meeting, a lot of times those are the numbers that are up on the board and the charts. Numbers such as production rate, getting the product completed, orders shipped, etc. Most of the time, quality is just expected, so they don't focus on it. Of course, everybody has to think about quality. I mean, we expect that, so let's not bother talking about it. And that's where you run into issues. But if you focus on quality, the numbers will generally fall in line. Doing a quality job comes natural to most people. They want to do a good job. I mean, it's inherent in our being. So if people when they're working, they want to feel good about it. I did a good job today. I did well. I produced a really good product. If they see it on the shelf, or they see it in a commercial somewhere or whatever, they feel good about it. But if they're pushed to cut corners, they'll do that. Okay, they'll cut the corners, but they're not going to feel good about it. And so they won't respect what they're doing, and they won't respect the supervision. So top management has to set the pace. They need to ask the right questions and put quality in the front. Everyone needs to know and feel confident that there's a structure and expectation for management, and they're all sharing the same structure, they're talking the same language, etc. So how do you do this? So what are some of the ways? You need to make sure there's frequent communication on it. That's really the main point. If you ignore it because you assume it's there, that's your first mistake. For example, signage, bulletin boards that have quality data on it, a newsletter. I've seen that many times. You come out with a newsletter. Of course, you talk about the company, you talk about the products, maybe the people, but you have a section on quality. Customer complaints come in. Are they shared with the employees? Does management show a care or concern about them? Holding routine review of quality data, root cause analysis, let employees provide suggestions that for improvement, and take them seriously, respond back to them. Supervisors that have minute by minute interaction with employees. What are they asking? What are they talking to their employees about? Is it about the speed of the machine, or how much is lost, or what's getting it? Or is it, do they occasionally go to the employee and ask about their hairnet? Are they wearing it correctly? Maybe they might ask, do you have any quality issues today? Do you think we need to make some improvements in the standards? Do a survey with employees. Ask them for the feedback. How are we doing with quality, among other things? And then get back to them on it. What are we going to do to make these changes? And the last thing I'll point out is a Gendel walk. Many may have heard of this already, where you have top management that will show up on the production floor, right? Getting into the weeds, so to speak, and actually walking through and expecting people to explain to them, what are we doing? One of the topics could be safety, but a main topic also could be quality. What are you doing for quality? We had a complaint 2 weeks ago. Can you give me the status of it? Give me an update. Quality issue that we had on the floor, a complaint, or whatever it is. And each supervisor could then share what they're doing in front of the employees. While the employees are working there, they see management walking around. Hey, that's important. So those are some of the things that can be done. And I'll wrap up with that.
Yeah. Wow. Well said, Steve. I mean, for anybody that was just tuned in, or wants to go back, reminder, this will be recorded so you can watch it later. I think you gave no short of like 5 or 7 actions that somebody can actually do, and they're achievable, right? I mean, these are not crazy, intense, labor-intensive ideas. I mean, asking for feedback, putting a survey out, doing a Gendel walk where you're actually just walking around the facility as management and observing, asking employees how things are going, getting their feedback. One thing that I remember with a client I worked with a few years ago that I really liked is they had an initiative called Caught You Doing Something Right. And it was every week there's something different. You could submit a request. Hey, I caught Tess, actually like cleaning, the bathroom, or I don't know, cleaning up the standing water, reporting something that maybe wasn't your job. You didn't just walk by something on the floor. I mean, just little things like that to encourage a culture of quality and doing something right. And I just can't reiterate your point strongly enough that like people don't go to work to make mistakes, right? And people go to work to make a difference. Especially in our industry, there's a lot of passion for the opportunity to work with the cannabis plant and to give folks direction, to have training and guidance so that they know how to do this correctly and repeatedly is the least that you can do for your employees, and it will pay dividends to you. And reduced employee turnover. I mean, who's tracking those KPIs? What's the cost of training employees when you have 50% turnover? I don't see a lot of folks tracking that and working to improve those metrics, and it's a huge cost. I could go on, but I think I'll I'll ping it back to you though, Steve, with one other point to build on, and before going around to Steve Gendel and Tess, but you actually helped create a standard on management commitment. And I really enjoyed developing that process that with you. Could you tell me a little bit more about that standard and what it entails? And yeah.
The ISO 22716.
No, oh, well, you can tell us about that one. And actually, I'd love to hear about that, but the standard through ASTM on management commitment.
Oh, sure. Yeah, so I went through a process. It took me about a year or so, back and forth, the ASTM process, which some people may know, may or may not, that anybody can come up as long as you're participating in the group with a standard and with the idea that it'll go international and be approved. And it's ASTM is respected around the world. So any standard that goes through has to be voted on by was it roughly 800 people or so, and it's internationally, and they can provide feedback, negative comments, changes they want, and each one has to be addressed. That's a timely process. We finally got one through on how management needs to manage quality, and the reason I put that one together, because there are documents out. In fact, there's one circulating now on basically a full quality manual that covers all the topics in some detail. But I wanted something because I felt that the industry right now, cannabis, top management needs a simple piece of paper. You know, you've heard before, management doesn't want to spend a lot of time reading things. They don't have much time. And for the most part, that's true. And I appreciate that. So I wanted to come up with a simple, short version document. Okay, here's the top things you need to do if you're thinking about quality and you want to put a quality system in place. Very simple, sweet, to the point. And that's the purpose of the standard that I put out. It finally did get published a few months ago, and I'm proud of it.
As you should be. So yeah, it's a great resource that folks can utilize. I mean, we have 48 standards within just ASTM Committee D37 on cannabis now that cover everything from management commitment. There was a recent one on supplier lifecycle management. So how do you manage your supplier? I mean, these are established best practices in the industry, in other industries, but we don't have a framework for that. And so going through at least 60% of the 1,200 members that have to review and approve the standard creates something that actually is consensus and actually works tailored to our industry and our scope. So highly encourage folks, again, these are easy, low-hanging fruit resources to take advantage of to prevent all the mistakes from happening that we continue to see. With that, and I appreciate that we've got a couple questions coming in, but I'm going to bring it over to Steve Gendel. So talking about standards a little bit further, and if you want to speak anything about quality versus safety, because that was something that I really enjoyed hearing your perspectives on as well this week when we were together with folks in Texas at ASTM. But tell me, what are the benefits to adhering to standards and perhaps going so far to actually get certification?
So that's a matter of really thinking about your consumers, your eventual market. And since my area, I got involved in this because of the growth in the number of edibles that are on the market. I like to think about it as consumers, not patients, the people who use this stuff. But they, are people, everyday people who want to use a product that they know is what it's supposed to be and is consistent and is safe. And that's quality and safety. And the two of them are just inseparably intertwined. You really can't have one without the other to any great degree. So if you're going to put in a system to have safety, then you're going to want a system that has quality, because the two of them overlap a lot. And I think that it's an important thing, because a lot of regulatory areas where there's established regulatory schemes tend to separate the two of them, because they're working under laws that were written specifically to address safety that very explicitly exclude quality issues. One of the nice things about this industry is that it's not constrained by that kind of regulatory roadblock. So we can integrate the two pieces together. And I think as Tess mentioned, this is a growing and changing industry. And the people who are going to survive in this industry are the ones who pay attention to quality so that their customers, the consumers, the people want their product because they know exactly what they're going to get. And they're going to survive because, not to put too fine a point on it, because they're not getting their customers sick or killing them by making defective products. And there's nothing worse for your business than to have to do a massive recall associated with illnesses or deaths for your product. It especially for an industry with lots of pretty small businesses, it'll put you out of business, and probably put the people involved in the management out of business permanently. So it's a very important thing.
Well said, Steve. With that, kind of thinking about quality and safety, and a lot of folks, especially maybe I don't know, where, every year as I evolve more, as I get to interact with more customers, more clients, more folks in the industry, I've seen a shift over the last, I'd say, 5 years from quality being, oh, that's quality control, right? That's the third party testing down the street, right? That the regulators make me do. They make me do. I have to take every batch and I have to send it out for this battery of tests, and I can't trust the results, but that's what the regulators make me do. And I have to put in this really annoying track and trace system that is really not designed for me, yada, yada, yada. But like, that's data, right? I mean, that is data. And without information on metrics around your product, around the contaminants, around the actual, milligrams or percentage of the cannabinoids that you're seeking to drive consistency within your product, how do you know how you're performing, and how do you know where your weak areas are and where you can improve? So a long way to bring it to Tess and ask, why is lab services so important? Why should you work with third-party labs closely? I mean, maybe you even want to talk about in-house testing labs. Tell me your thoughts.
Yeah, I mean, third-party testing labs have a very unique place in cannabis compared to other consumable goods, because every single lot of cannabis products, typically in every state, have to be tested before they're released to be sold in dispensaries. They're in a really unique spot. And then also the cannabis manufacturer is paying them to test their materials. So there's a slight conflict of interest there. And there's a whole issue of lab shopping and things like that. But to your point, like, they basically, cultivators sort of unload all of the quality and safety parameters onto the third-party testing lab, and throughout the entire cultivation and manufacturing process, they pretty much operate blind. They don't know what's really going on with their product. They might send out a couple of R&D samples for potency testing, or to make sure that they, if they saw visible mold, maybe they dry cured it enough or took out the bad batches that were very visible, and they want to send out a quick sample to make sure the whole batch hasn't been spoiled, things like that. So it's really, really important to work with a lab that you trust, and to work with a lab that's willing to do some of that R&D for you, willing to come into your facility and maybe look and help you find the root cause of some of these microbial organisms, since that's typically, the biggest reason why most cannabis, at least for flower, why they fail. Is because of microbial contamination. And so it's really important to have a third-party testing lab that you trust and that is willing to come in and help you. It's also important to start gearing up so that you can get eyes on the microbes in your facility, and even on the active ingredients within your products. So getting in-house HPLC, you can buy pretty cheap, quick equipment that anybody can use for $10,000. You can get a little micro lab up and running for a few grand. And then you have people in there operating it, and you're testing along the entire process. So you can start to sleuth out which microbes are on your final product and where are they coming into your process pathway, because they're not just magically appearing, they're coming from somewhere. So identifying where the root cause is can be pretty simple for many cannabis cultivators to integrate into their process. And in the long term, it's going to help them, and they won't have to rely so much on third-party testing and won't have to pay those high testing costs. And then all that drama around lab shopping and things like that, you as a cultivator will have a good idea of what your product looks like before it ever goes out for third-party testing, because you've run those tests, what's going on there. So I think that that's where the industry is going. And again, you can do these things on a pretty low budget, and pretty much every food manufacturer and even brewery has one of these small quality labs in-house, so that they can get eyes on things before they have to send things out. So that's where I think it's going.
I love it. Geez, I have so many thoughts. I mean, one, important reminder. You mentioned, most food companies and even breweries have in-house analytics. And I assume they're not doing it because somebody told them they have to. They're doing it because they find value in it, right? And it goes back to your whole running blind. And I like to tell folks a lot. I've been speaking on this for years, where the industry and the regulations have set a lot of us up for failure with this concept of you must do final product testing and you can only go through a third-party testing lab. And it's totally shifted the dynamics of building quality by design into the product and doing it right the first time and collecting that data on your own and understanding the value of it versus it's a pass-fail toll booth. And in Colorado, where the results consistently be 15% of final products failing for microbials, and we have a reduced testing program in our state. We have one of the most lenient in our state, and I'm looking at Tess because we both live in Colorado, but we're one of very few states that don't require every single batch of cannabis products to be tested. And so with that high of a failure rate, forget what it means. Is it safe? Is it not? Going down mycotoxins and speciation, et cetera. But what is that telling you? It's telling you we have a serious problem that nobody's addressing. And that small investment can allow you to get proactive and start trending your data and understand where the point source is to prevent it from occurring. Because the cost of one product failure, I'd say for a batch, especially if you're a decent sized operator, far outweighs the investment of that initial equipment, right? I mean, this is just basic investments to make informed decisions. I don't know. Yeah, I don't know if any of you have anything you want to add there to the whole testing thoughts.
So I'll add in 2 cents, which is Tess sort of alluded to this, but in the food world, they learned a number of years ago that you can't test in safety, you can't test in quality. You have to control your processes from the start. You have to know what's coming into your facility. You have to know where it's going. You have to know what you're doing with it. And you have to, if you develop processes that control the problems, then you can measure your processes. And the kind of testing we're talking about here becomes a verification activity. And you don't have to do very much of it, and you don't have to do it very often, because you've prevented the problems in the first place. And that's why the FDA's regulation on foods are called preventive controls, because you prevent problems by spending your time at the beginning very carefully looking at what you're doing and eliminating the source of problems.
Yep, I exactly could not agree more. Well said, Steve. So, there's a question from the audience I want to bring up, and I'm going to pitch it to you, Steve Gendel, because this kind of relates to a conversation we had with a spreadsheet earlier this week, and I get this all the time. So I'm going to state the question here, and then I'm going to add a little bit of color to it for thoughts. The question is, would advising cultivators to familiarize themselves with 21 CFR Part 211, Part 11, and USP 797 be a good preparation for federal legalization? And I'd like to put 2 tweaks on that. Would advising cultivators to familiarize themselves with the CFRs on GMPs in general be good preparation? And is it really just good preparation for federal legalization, or is it just good business practices?
So the answer to the first question is yes. You should be familiar with good manufacturing practices, and I don't really care at this stage with which one you choose. Just pick one and get familiar with it. And you're absolutely right. Again, these rules, regulations are really expressions of the concept I was just talking about: control, understanding what you're controlling, what you're doing, so that you can control it and do a good job of it. And to expand a little bit on the conversation we had, good manufacturing practices and preventive controls are really broad concepts that apply to every kind of industry. And I noticed that the question was about cultivators, and certainly the problem of what you do when you're growing things out in a field is different than what you do when you're growing them in a greenhouse. But there are even the produce safety regulations that are worth looking at to see what you think about those if you're an outdoor grower. But basically, and this is where I was going with this in our discussion, realize that the whole concept of these controls, good manufacturing practices in a broad sense, really boil down to having a good environment for your work, which includes your building and grounds and what you're doing, having the appropriate equipment, cleaning up properly, making sure that your employees practice good hygiene, and recording, doing record keeping and monitoring to make sure that you're doing all this. And that is everything you need to know about how to make good quality, safe, consistent product. Now, admittedly, there are a few details that go under those big headings, but that's really what it is. It's the place and the equipment and the people that are and your processes are what makes for good manufacturing.
I love it. Steve Cooper, I had a feeling you'd have something to add here. Jump in.
Yeah, it's what you're talking about is right on. I agree 100%. I just would like to add the idea that these GMP regulations, whether it's 210, 211, or any other one, that it wasn't just somebody sitting there making it up and trying to make things difficult. It's a conglomeration of all the things that the world agrees is important. So it's sort of, you can look at that as a cheat sheet, a hint, a book of hints on, here's, if you do this right, you're going to be good.
Yeah. So
in good shape.
Steve, I think to agree with what you're saying and to emphasize it, there are regulations, international ones, the Codex Alimentarius, the EU, all have GMP type regulations, which are, the wording is a little bit different, the order is a little different, but they're exactly the same in concept. And I think it's really important to know that in an agency like the FDA, when they go about writing a regulation like this, they don't make this up from scratch. They figure it out by looking at industry best practices, and they basically sort of write down what a lot of people are doing anyway. So this is, as much as it looks like it's government regulation, it's actually, the origin of it was industry figuring out for themselves the best way to do these things. There's a really interesting story I won't get into now, but the origin of the whole HACCP system, which goes back to the Apollo space program, and even further than that, back into World War II and quality control for armaments then. But industry invented all of these things, and FDA used them.
Yeah,
I can also add a little bit that from the perspective of GMP, we mentioned it's just basic common sense. Okay, a lot of companies don't follow it as well. There is an aspect of it in terms of interpretation, and you may need some help from experts on how to interpret what it's saying. Because if you just skim through it, it looks too simple, but there's a lot behind it. The question related to cultivation, though, when you look at 210, 211, there certainly could be, there's a way of applying that GMP to cultivation. A lot of times I hear in the industry that, the GMP only starts after harvest. And that's not totally true. There are aspects of GMP that once you understand it, they do apply to cultivation, parts of it. And how it applies may be a little different, but you got to understand, what is the GMP trying to achieve, which is, avoiding the risks of contamination, confusion, etc. So when you look at it that way and you address things with a risk mentality, you can apply many of the aspects of that to those GMPs to the cultivation as well.
Yeah, and I think the big takeaway too there is here, bringing everything back in context of, it's not about 211, right? It's not about 111 or 117. It's about what's written there and the overarching themes and taking baby steps. And a couple other words that were mentioned here, risk, risk assessments, characterizing your risk. Every facility, every operation is going to be different. There's a major difference between a company with 150 employees, 100 SKUs, and very sophisticated equipment, and a company with manual operations. There's also a major difference between that 100 and 150 employee operation and an operation with 5 to 10 staff that's highly automated, produces 1 or 2 product lines, and has characterized their risks, right? Like which goes back to where HACCP and RPC comes in with, like, doing hazard analyses and understanding what are actually the risks. Is it pesticides? Is it chemical contaminants? Is it glass and brittle plastics? So they're foreign objects that could get into your products. If you're putting something into a vape cart, is the glass and brittle plastics risk as high for you to focus on versus somebody creating an edible? These are major things to consider. But you start with just asking the questions. And if you haven't asked the questions and if you haven't documented it, then what do you have to rest on, and how do you go? And without that, how do you inform a culture of quality where you're establishing, here's the concerns that we have, here's why I'm telling you to do these checks and have these checks and balances. You need all that background to educate the why and to help with that culture of quality. And then, the final thing that I like to remind folks of is the concept of, like, being legally defensible. And if it's you versus a consumer, or you versus the regulator, there's an adverse event, there's a suspected product contamination, and you have no documentation to show that your product is clean and orderly, that your staff has been trained, that your equipment was properly installed. If you have no records from that day, you have no story to back up on. And think of yourself in that, even a 20-person company. You're not going to bring that technician in and you can't expect them to remember what happened 3 months ago, right? I don't even remember what I wore for clothes yesterday, let alone what I did 3 months ago half the time. So you need to document those records, and that serves as your best line of defense, which you can then chart and trend over time to get proactive. Again, just taking those basic concepts, not overthinking what 211 requires or even 111, but just starting, pick off one bite of the apple. I don't know, either Steve or Tess, do you have anything to add to that or challenge on where to begin? And then I want to talk about the FDA with the minutes we've got remaining.
Nothing more to add. I think we've made the point.
Yeah. I mean, I think from a practical, coming from that point of view, like working, you've always got so much to do. Like, these cultivators, they work really, really hard, and they're sweating under the lights, they're trimming, they're doing everything all day, every day. So my advice would be to treat this like a special project, set it up for a 3 to 6 month timeline to start looking at maybe one of your biggest issues. Let's say you've got mold contamination on your flower. So get a team together, like you said, assemble a team that includes leadership, includes your technicians, includes middle management, get everyone involved to start understanding the process, where potential hazards could come into play. And start thinking about ways that you can vet your vendors. If you think your vendor is giving you contaminated cocoa, if you sent your cocoa out to third-party testing and you saw it had aspergillus in it, you have aspergillus on your final product, start asking them for some CFAs showing that they're testing their product and that it doesn't have aspergillus. Start vetting your vendors and holding them to account. Those are some preventive controls you can put in place without having to, again, kind of run around with your pants on fire because you found out that you had like 5 lots fail and you don't know what to do now. So getting that, it is the manufacturer's responsibility. So, and it's also a point of pride when people feel like they have feedback that's being listened to, they will perform better. They have agency, they care. And that is really important to establish that culture. And I think that Steve alluded to that too. So I think we are all kind of like in our own little quality circle here, but it's really, really important. And you can do it. You can do it. You go online. There's really cheap training. There's guides to do this. You don't have to start from nothing. There are starting points out there.
Mm-hmm. Well said. And, maybe with that, I'd like to segue into the final topic around the FDA. And so I think this is a natural transition here from talking about the CFRs. And so again, 211, 111, yada, yada, yada. Today, the FDA, after establishing several months ago in a statement that their Cannabis Products Committee was going to recognize the interest in the proliferation of products containing CBD in the marketplace, and commissioned a cross-functional group that they've actually had for about a decade now to focus on what can they do to regulate and provide safety guardrails for the cannabis industry, specifically focused on the CBD products. And today they announced, well, what did they announce, Steve? Steve Gendel, give us the takeaway of that statement.
Well, basically what they announced is they threw up their hands and said, we can't do it. Congress has got to do it. They didn't feel that there was any way that these products could meet the standards that they've been given to work with for either dietary supplements or foods, and that the only way to move forward is for a new regulatory regime, and that because that's Congress's responsibility, they put it back on Congress's shoulders to do. So bottom line is they gave up, put it back in the hands of the Congress, which is a very interesting thing to do. It's in my memory, this is the first time the agency has publicly said, no, Congress, you do it. There have been lots of things that the agency has done where they wish the Congress had done things differently, but they found a way to make it work. And there's lots of things that they've done where they've worked with Congress in the drafting stages of something to get a workable scheme available through Congress. But I don't recall ever seeing a situation where they've said, we've looked at it as hard as we can and we can't figure out what to do next. So yeah. It's a really, really interesting situation.
And so, is that I'm curious everybody's feedback here. Should we be excited? Should we be frustrated? Is this an opportunity? What does this mean for us as an industry? How does that impact us, and what can we do?
So I'll start since my I'm off mute right at the moment. So there's a couple of ups and downs with this. One of them is, are they going to follow this up by more rigorous enforcement than they have? In which case it's going to be really problematic. I don't think so, but it's really hard to know. I think what's interesting about it is it creates the opportunity for a completely different kind of regulatory scheme, and that would work for the industry a lot better than what we have. And the example that I think that a lot of people would choose in thinking about that is what they do in Canada, where they have created a whole different class of products and regulate that class of products, the cannabis containing products, entirely separately from everything else. So in the area that I work in, for instance, you don't have cannabis or hemp containing foods, you have edibles. And by defining that special class of products, they just took it out of the food safety regulation area altogether and have a system in place that regulates all the cannabis products. So that's at least one possibility. And of course, the other problem is, of course, if you're asking Congress to do things, that's never a quick process. So this is something which is going to be hanging on and going to be state responsibility for a long time to come.
Well said there. You know, I think looking to our neighbors to the north, as you mentioned, is really smart. And I see this, I like to use the word opportunity to continue to craft the framework that we want. And, you know, dietary supplements, DSHEA happened in 1994, for those that are not familiar, which led to the promulgation of CGMPs for dietary supplements about a decade later. You know, those are frameworks, again, still GMPs, but it's got a slightly different flavor. And so what are the concepts and considerations that really apply to us? We can create that. And in the absence of regulatory oversight, don't wait, right? We take this extra runway now for whatever unknown period it is while Congress figures its life out or doesn't, and let's show that we can be good actors. You can actually, you know, again, to Steve's point earlier, a lot of these concepts came from industry. So the leading organizations in our industry are going to set the stage and set the bar. So be part of that, be on the bus driving it and shaping it, or be prepared for that clash. And it's basic best business practices again. So it really behooves folks to take advantage of the opportunity to drive standards development and to create the framework that they want so that we can have someday in the future where there is some sort of consistent oversight that protects consumers. I don't know, any final thoughts? We're getting towards the end here, and I don't have time to answer the other questions, but we did have some great questions come in that I will follow up on. Takeaways, predictions for 2023. The FDA already threw our probably first prediction question out the window, but what does this mean? Steve Cooper or who wants to go first here on your big prediction for this year? Steve Cooper, can I volley to you?
Oh, prediction for where we're headed. Oh boy. I'm not sure. I think we're headed for more complexity, and you know, there's I think the industry is growing rapidly. It's been through a couple of cycles. I see, especially recently, there is interest from a regulatory standpoint on what's happening and trying to get their hands around it. And I can just relate a little bit of a subject from my standpoint. The cosmetic area, when I was working on putting together the ISO standard for cosmetic GMP back in the early 2000s. At that time, the FDA had a very small little one-page GMP, pretty much. You know, don't adulterate the product, don't contaminate it. But they relied on the industry to self-regulate mostly. And what happened with over time was that the cosmetic community worldwide, basically commerce, all the companies felt that we need to have a standard here. With, you know, what's the standard? And it was at a time when there were a lot of standards that were in effect, and it helped international commerce, for example. So there was a push, and then the EU putting together their requirements were really driving it, a lot of it, and it had to be finalized. So in fact, the EU was going to come out with their own standard if we didn't head it off with the ISO standard. So we put together an ISO standard, and it was accepted globally, and the FDA accepts that. Said, fine, you're doing fine. You know, it is definitely a watered down version of pharma, for sure, but it's something. And you know, the FDA does come in and do inspections of cosmetic companies. It's a lighter version of inspection. There's much more bite to the pharma. But I envision that the cannabis may kind of go the same way initially, and then it'll evolve into something that's probably closer to pharma. There was a question that I attempted to answer a little bit in the chat about If we have to implement 210 to 11, it'll kill the companies. It's too heavy, and the answer basically is every company handles it a little differently in terms of how they address the concerns. But for example, if you're saying I don't want to contaminate my product, well, what do you do to not contaminate your product? You can have all kinds of fancy $100,000 or $1 million equipment to do that, or you can take some simple steps, keep on top of it, check it, in order to run your company well. So there's as you get around and you see all the different operations as some of us have, I certainly have over many years, there's so many different ways to skin a cat and to do things that are generally acceptable to the FDA. There's no one size fits all. So that can answer that type of question. There's a lot more we can probably say about it, but that's my perspective is I don't know where it's headed exactly, but I know it's headed somewhere in the right direction, probably at some point.
And I'll hold on my thoughts. Tess, I want to hear your final takeaways there, and I'll try to wrap this all up.
Yeah, I mean, I think in this industry, the only constant is change. So, and many of us have had to stay on our toes, be agile, stay informed, build a good network. Because I do think that, as Steve was saying, I think that standards are gonna start being expected. I'd really like to see the standards established, from the cultivators themselves, from the craft growers, from the people who know the plant, who know the process, and are really, pushing this forward as sort of a grassroots effort. I would love to see that. And I think that it's starting. I really do. Conversations have shifted a lot. And now it's not so much about like, how can I get this to pass? And it's like, how can I trust my process and sleep at night and not be in on the weekend because something crazy happened and now we're failing and we have to do all this, getting your processes dialed in. So I think a lot of the future of cannabis, and hopefully this year, we'll see more activation and rallying around establishing these standards.
I could not agree more with that. I see the market decline. You see, again, we started with the headlines. You see a lot of negative reports. Major multi-state operator Curaleaf today just announced that they're shutting down operations in 3 states and 10% of their workforce, which is absolutely insane to think about. But at the same time, what does that mean? Things are getting more competitive, and the folks that aren't organized are struggling and are having to focus, right? And we've seen this in Canada, we're seeing this in every state, and we see this in every industry. And I'm encouraged, going back to Steve's example, perfect example of industries have done this before. Cotton, it took the cotton industry over 100 years to figure this out and get standards. That's the only way to facilitate trade and establish trust in a marketplace. And I think we're working at a rapid clip, and we have some flexibility despite all of the forces against us to continue working together to converge with a harmonized system that we can rely on for trust and safety and product quality. And so I look forward to 2023 driving force. It's not just about innovation, but it's innovation towards, consistency and getting everybody on the same page. Because if we don't work together, the folks that are working together are actually seeing those benefits. And I've seen, both sides of the spectrum. For every news article I see that's, talking in a negative light about how woe is me and how difficult it is, I'm talking to operators that are like, we're having a banner year. Our sales are up 50%. Our margins are huge with our CBD isolate process. And it's because they've stayed focused and consistent and have adopted and gotten certified to GMP best practices through third parties. And they've added that outside lens, small piece of investment to get ideas for continuous improvement. And they've actually listened to both the folks on the floor and the outside experts that they've trusted and brought in to help them figure it out so they don't have to do it alone. And so I'm really encouraged to see, there will be a lot more market consolidation, but that's the only way that we're going to move forward, because it's going to drive more consistency. So with that, we're a few minutes over time. This has been great. I appreciate folks for sticking around. Steve Gendel, I think, can I count your FDA statement on final thoughts, or did you have anything else you wanted to add
I have lots of stuff I'd like to add, but we need a whole nother webinar to talk about those things. So next time, same time, same station.
Perfect. Sounds like I can count on you to come back again. I so much appreciate all three of you and the audience. This has been a blast. There's so much more we could talk about, as you mentioned, Steve. We're going to continue to do these webinars every month. I'm putting in a link right now. So next month, we'll actually be talking about OSHA standards, OSHA requirements, cannabis dust and inhalation risks, both from cannabis dust and solvents, and employee safety. So that will be a really engaging hot button topic that's been in the news lately. Again, thank you, everybody. Thank you, Tess. Thank you, Steve. Thank you, Steve. And we will be following up with your questions to answer and more links. So stay tuned. Cheers.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye. Thank you.
Evening.